Ruth is kind of a funny book. It's a little odd. It's got some odd lessons for us to learn. So if we remember from last week, where are we coming from? We're coming out of, what did Amy talk about? Don't everybody say it at once. Judges. So we're coming out of the Judges, and she talked about the sin cycle, how, we are devoted to Christ, and it just keeps going around where we become then in our sin pattern. And so from there, we're going to pick up with Ruth, the book of Ruth. First, we'll talk about Naomi, because Naomi is her mother-in-law, and she's a very important part of this whole story. So Naomi, first of all, she's married, and she has 2 sons, right? I need lots of participation. So yes, she has 2 sons. Okay, so first, her husband dies, right? And then about 10 years later, who else dies? Her sons. So here she is. She's a widow. She has no son. She has no family. And she has these 2 daughter-in-laws, correct? Does anybody know what their daughter-in-laws' names are? Ruth, great. And not Oprah, but Orpah. Okay, so I always like to think that it's Oprah, but it's not really Oprah. So she has these 2 daughter-in-laws, and they say, we're going to come with you, right? And Naomi decides at this point in time, you know what, I'm going to go back to my homeland because I'm here in this foreign land, and I'm just ready to go back to my homeland. I don't have any family here. So Naomi begs for her daughters to go back to their families, because in that culture, if you lose your husbands, you go back to your families, and because they didn't have any kids, so they wouldn't stay there, right? So Naomi says to her daughter-in-laws, go ahead and go back to your families. Finally, she convinces Orpah, right, to go back to her family. So she does, right? She goes ahead and she goes back. But what does Ruth say? If we look in, open your Bibles to Ruth 1, 14 to 18. And it says, and again, they wept together, and Orpah kissed her mother-in-law goodbye, but Ruth insisted on staying with Naomi. See, Naomi said to her, your sister-in-law has gone back to her people and to her gods. You should do the same. But Ruth replied, don't ask me to leave you and turn back. I will go wherever you go and live wherever you live. Your people will be my people, and your God will be my God. I will die where you die and will be buried there. May the Lord punish me severely. If I allow anything but death to separate us. So then Naomi saw that Ruth had made up her mind to go with her, and she stopped urging her. So Ruth decides that she's going to stay with Naomi. I don't know about you, but that seems like a very odd thing to me, that my daughter-in-law is going to say, okay, I'd rather not go to my parents, and I'm just going to stay with you. So that's a really odd thing. Ruth, the book of Ruth is has very unique lessons for us to learn, and it has some very unique things. So Naomi finally gives in and says, okay, fine, you can come with me, we're going to go. So they arrived in Bethlehem, and whenever they get there, everybody is very excited to see Naomi, right? Does anybody know what Naomi says about that? When she gets there and she's excited, what does she say? She changes her name. Why does she change her name? Andrew? Because her life was bitter. So she allowed her circumstances to change her whole life, right? So she's feeling bitter. She says, call me Mara. Call me Mara, because Naomi means beautiful, and I'm not beautiful anymore. I am a bitter woman. God has made me this way. Because she felt like God had made her life so bitter and so horrible by taking away her family. Which seems really weird, because it's like, here's Ruth. I wonder how Ruth felt about that. Because here she is, walking beside her through everything, and she's like, my life is bitter. My life is horrible. And what do you think Ruth is thinking? Well, what about me? Why am I not making a difference in your life? So she wants to be called Mara. And then, so when they get there, Ruth was going to try to provide food for her. And how was she going to do that? Work where? Work in the fields and glean wheat. So she goes out and she finds this fields, and she just goes around all the harvesters and picks up all the extras that are on the ground. And she just so happened to pick Boaz's field to glean. Boaz finally acknowledges Ruth after a couple of days and tells her to only glean here. He says, only come to my field, and I'll give you water and I'll give you what you need. But Ruth doesn't understand, why is he being so nice to me? Why is he saying, just come to my field? So he sees, and he explains to her, look, I see what you do for this widow woman, Naomi, that you are like, you're just taking care of her, and you don't have to do that. And so Ruth's like, okay, fine, I'll stay here, and I'll glean your wheat, which was fine because she would take that back to Naomi, right? Boaz feeds her and then tells her servants to help her glean. Ruth goes back to Naomi and tells her where she has been gleaning. So if you look in Ruth 2:19 through 20, so turn to Ruth 2, and let's look at verse 19, where it says, so much, Naomi exclaimed, where did you gather all the grain today? Where did you work? May the Lord bless the one who helped you. So Ruth told her mother-in-law about the man in whose field she had worked. And she said, the man I worked with today, his name is Boaz. May the Lord bless him, Naomi told her daughter-in-law. He is showing kindness to us as well as to your dead husband. That man is one of our closest relatives, one of our family redeemers. Then Ruth said, what's more, Boaz even told me to come back and stay with his harvesters until the entire harvest is completed. This is wonderful, Naomi explained. Do as he said, stay with his workers right through the whole harvest. You will be safe there, unlike other fields. So now she finds out that he's the redeemer, right? So he's the one that's going to, does everybody know what a redeemer is? Who can explain to me a redeemer? Okay, so the person who marries or redeems them of when, so like say, so they're looking for somebody to redeem Naomi, somebody to redeem Ruth. So Boaz invited her to go come back and keep harvesting over and over again. And they found out that he's the redeemer. Naomi wants to find her a home. So finally she says, okay, I got to find you a home because I'm not going to birth any more children. I'm too old. And you're not going to wait for them anyway. So she finally figures out that she's going to have to find a home for Ruth. So then if we look in chapter 3, verse 1 through 13, it says, one day Naomi said to Ruth, my daughter, it's time that I found a permanent home for you so that you will be provided for. Boaz is a close relative of ours, and he's been very kind by letting you gather grain with his workers. Tonight he will be winnowing barley at the threshing floor. Now do as I tell you. Okay, this gets a little weird, but this is what she says. Don't take this as a good lesson. Take a bath and put on perfume and dress in your nicest clothes. Then go to the threshing floor, but don't let Boaz see you until he has finished his meal. Does anybody else see something wrong with that? Yeah, what do we see? Yeah, so she's trying to get all fancy and go find him. So be sure to notice where he lies down, then go and uncover his feet and lie down there. He will tell you what to do. Okay, I don't know, but that just seems really odd that if you're trying to court a guy, that you're going to get all dressed up and then you're going to find out, we're going to just let him drink or whatever and eat, and then when he's done, go watch where he goes lays down, and then you go lay down at his feet. That is really bizarre. Do you guys not find that bizarre? It's bizarre. It's very bizarre. So then it says, I will do everything you say, Ruth replied. So she went down to the threshing floor that night and followed the instructions of her mother-in-law. After Boaz had finished his meal and was in good spirits, he lay down beside the heap of grain and went to sleep. Then Ruth came quietly, uncovered his feet, and lay down. Around midnight, Boaz suddenly woke up and turned over. He was surprised to find a woman lying at his feet. Well, no kidding, right? And he's like, who are you? He demanded. I am your servant, Ruth, she replied. Spread the corners of your covering over me with you, for you are my family redeemer. The Lord bless you, my daughter, Boaz explained. You are showing more family loyalty now than ever by not running after a younger man, whether rich or poor. Now don't worry about a thing, my daughter. I will do what is necessary, for everyone in town knows you are an honorable woman. But there is one problem. While it is true that I am one of your family redeemers, there is another man who is more closely related to you than I am. So Boaz realizes that there is somebody else that's in her line before he is. So instead of saying, well, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to take her land and then I'm going to marry her, he said, and he's being honest, and he says, I know there's somebody before you, and so I'm going to go to them first and make sure that they don't want to be your redeemer. So stay here tonight, and in the morning I will talk to him. If he is willing to redeem you, then let him marry you. But if he is not willing, then as surely as the Lord lives, I will marry you. Now lie down here until morning. So Ruth lay at Boaz's feet until the morning, but she got up before it was light enough for people to recognize each other. For Boaz said, no one must know that a woman was here at the threshing floor. Boaz also said to her, bring your cloak and spread it out. He measured out 6 scoops of barley into the cloak and helped her put into her bag. So basically, Boaz is going to go now to that day, and he's going to go talk to this other redeemer and find out. So if you then go to, in chapter 4, it talks about this, where Boaz then goes to the town gates, and he meets this lady, he says, or this guy, and he, come over here, friend. I want to talk to you. So they sat down together. Then Boaz called 10 leaders from the town and asked them to sit as witnesses. And then if you go on down, after he asked, the man replied, all right, I'll redeem it. So he agrees, I'll redeem it. But then Boaz says, of course, your purchase of the land from Naomi also requires that you marry Ruth, the Moabite woman, that way she can have children who will carry on her husband's name and keep the land in the family. Well, that guy was like, whoa, you didn't tell me that part. You did not explain it fully to me. So he decided, nope, I'm not going to do that. I don't want to take on this because that'll mess up his estate. Okay, so he basically had nothing to gain from it. So he said, forget it. I'm not going to do this. So Boaz goes back and he tells Ruth, he said, okay, I'm going to redeem you. And he marries Ruth. And they soon later had a son. And then, so what's that son's name? Does anybody know what his son's name is? Andrew. Obed. Obed. What's the significance of Obed? Yeah, he was the father of Jesse and the grandfather of David. What's the significance of that? Jesus. It's the line of Jesus. So we have several lessons we can learn from Ruth, this odd story. So first of all, let's talk about how Ruth fits into God's big story. This fits into God's big story by, don't give up on God when we think he has given up on us. He just might be preparing to do something better than we expect. God's kindness moves us from emptiness to abundance. So if you look at Naomi's life, she went from emptiness, of feeling bitter, of feeling like God had abandoned her by losing her husband and her 2 sons, to being abundant, right? And then the more the world seems unstable, the more we see God's love is stable. Now, how can Ruth fit into our story? God always provides a place for us to belong and people to belong to. Friends and family help us through hard times. God brings us to our next step at the right time in the right way. So if we're going to go back, because there's one verse that really stood out to me, and it was chapter 2 and verse 3. And if you look at the New Century Version, it says it a little bit differently. So it says, so Ruth went out to gather grain behind the harvesters. And it so happened she found herself working in a field that belongs to Boaz. So that phrase, it so happened, do you think that it so happened? That it just happened that way? Do you think it's coincidence that she ended up in Boaz's field? No, it wasn't coincidence that she ended up in that field. It was purposed by God. That God had already purposed that. And there's so many things in our lives that we can think about of it just so happened in our life. I mean, if I were to think about my life and all the things that just so happened to fall in line, for example, so in my story, we wouldn't be here tonight if it didn't just so happen that I was looking at a newspaper 13 years ago and found a small little church that was meeting at a high school called Crosswinds Community Church. And it just so happened that they needed a youth volunteer. And that just so happened that they then merged with New Life Community or New Life Worship Center and became New Life Community Center or Community Church. And that just so happened was also in need of volunteers as theirs was getting ready to leave. And it just so happened that another couple was going to walk beside us on this journey with us, in which if that didn't happen, I'm pretty sure that we wouldn't have had been able to do it by ourselves, nor would we have the confidence to do it by ourselves. And so it just so happens that they were there for a temporary amount of time, maybe a few weeks, in order for us to just so happen to start doing youth ministry with New Life Community Church. And it just so happens that we've been here for 13 years. Is that a coincidence? Or did God specifically place that newspaper in my hand 13 years ago, and God placed us with the people around us? You know, and it just so happened that, I mean, you can just go on and on about all the things that just so happen. And we think, oh, that just so happened. That was just a coincidence. That wasn't anything, no big deal. So do you think that it just so happens that you chose to come to youth group tonight? That it just so happens that you're here tonight and that you're sitting here? Is that a coincidence? No, it's not a coincidence. Or maybe it just so happened that you, after listening to all the things that are going on into the world with Paris and with all the racial things that are happening, you just so happened to be giving up on God and you needed a place to be. Or maybe for whatever reason you're feeling empty and God brought you here. And he brought you here so that you can be surrounded by people that care about you and people that love you, and that he could help you in that situation by putting specific people into your life. So is it that you just so happened to come tonight? Is it that I just so happened to look at the newspaper? Or is it that we just so happened to move into a neighborhood that we did, and now the Davidsons are here? Did that just so happen? No, those things don't just so happen. They don't happen by coincidence. It happens because God puts people there. God put us in the places that we're in. It's not that you're in small groups because you just happen to be there, right? Do you believe that that's why you're there? And it just so happened that youth group is a place to feel like you belong, that your friends are here, possibly, or maybe you have new friends that are here. So I guess the next thing that we want to think about, and I think we'll break up a little bit so you guys can talk about this in groups for just a few minutes, is what is your next step? Because you're not here by accident. You're not here without a purpose. You're not here just because. Because if you look at how Ruth fits into your story, God always provides a place for us to belong and people to be around us. He provides friends and family for us when we're having hard times. Do I have time to break into groups? Yep. Okay, so let's break into groups really quick, and I want you guys to talk about, I don't have questions for you to answer, but I want you as groups just to talk about, like, what is my next step? Because I'm not here by accident. I'm not here just because. Like, God placed me here. God placed these people over here on the couch together. So let's just break up, like, this group right here, get together, and like these two couches and this little group over here, and then like this group over here kind of mesh together, and then adults kind of intermingle and find out what their next step is. How can they get involved in small groups? Maybe that's your next step. Maybe you're here and you've been here for several years and you're like, okay, I need a new step. What does that look like? Where can you start serving? Maybe you're ready to start serving in a different place and you're wanting to know, like, where can I serve? What can I do? So just start talking about those things. There's no specific questions or anything like that, but just talk about it, because they're not coincidence. There's not a coincidence that you're here tonight. Coincidence that he does that. It's not coincidence that he just so happens put you in a community of people. Probably about 10 years ago, I can relate with Clarissa very well, who spoke this weekend at church. About 10 years ago, I lost a baby. And I was very angry with God. I felt like Naomi at that time, where I was so mad and so angry. But at that same time, it was right before Christmas. And we came to church for Christmas Eve service, and everybody was congratulating us. And I had lost that baby the day before that. And so everybody was congratulating us, and we didn't know what to say. We didn't know what to do. But the cool thing is that we just so happened to come to to Christmas Eve service. We just so happened to be surrounded by our church family who loved us and was able to lift us up during that time of hurt, that time of just being mad, and that time of just not knowing where we were going. And it just so happened that about 2 months after losing that baby, we got pregnant with another baby whose name is Braden. And it just so happened that 3 years after that, we got pregnant again with another baby who just so happened to be two babies, and we have twin girls. So it just so happened that I'm pretty sure that if we probably wouldn't have the twins because we wouldn't have tried again. So it just so happened that maybe God had placed all of that in line. Do I believe it's coincidence? No. I believe that it's an act of God, that God put all of those situations into place for a purpose and for a reason. So when you're thinking about where you are and what you're going to do and where you're going to serve, don't think of it as a coincidence. It's not a coincidence that I moved next door to Rachel and Kevin and Keenan and Caden. That's not a coincidence that we did that. God knew that that's where we were going to move 2 years ago. He knew that that's where he was going to put us, and he knew what the purpose was. We had no idea what the purpose was. We had no idea why we were going there and that we were going to become such good friends. We didn't know that that was going to help them in a hard situation that they were having, just like we were helped in a hard situation that we were having 10 years prior to that. So when you're thinking about, why am I here? What am I doing? Look at the big picture of what God might have for you. So let's go ahead and pray, and then Reg can close us up. Dear Heavenly Father, I just thank you so much for this night, Lord. I thank you that you have everything planned out for us, God, that you don't give us coincidences, but that it just so happened because you planned it, Lord. And I just pray that we will just keep that mindset. And I pray, Lord, as we go through the schools, that we could be that light in the schools that we need to be. I thank you for this night. I thank you for the students that are here. And I just pray that you will just help them tomorrow to be your light. In Jesus' name.